Okay, so I want to talk about some rally car tips and tricks. These really apply to a lot of race cars. Some of them are going to be Subaru specific, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a ton of them, and I'm sure there's a ton I don't know. So if you remember any or know of any that I don't mention today, please leave them in the comments. All right, let's get started. First, for jack stands, when you're at service in the dirt, in the ground, I just put I don't know, 3/8 or ½ inch thick piece of plywood and painted it black on the bottom of each one and bolted it in so it doesn't sink into the ground. And they're oversized, they're like 6-ton, so they're bigger and more stable. Obviously, pin stands are probably better, but these are cheap, convenient, and I can use them for stuff other than rally. So at your jacking point, you can mark the locations for your crew guys so they know where it's at. And then at your jack stand point, you can reinforce this door seam with square round tubing, which is handy for bolting stuff to it sometimes, and it will prevent it from getting crushed up. Well, I haven't done it on this jack. Some other things you can do are raise this mounting point a couple inches so you get more total lift out of the jack, because most rally cars are pretty tall and there'll be space when you start jacking it. Another thing you can do is run oversized wheels so it rolls better on grass and dirt. Subaru 5-speeds and 6-speeds, if you're going to store it or pull it out, you can block this drive shaft hole with aerosol paint can cap. Kind of similar idea, not on this transmission, but the ones with the male axles, so not this type but the other type. You can use like brake clean caps or other aerosol paint caps with a couple layers of electrical tape and just plug that hole with them. Handy if you're washing it or storing it for a long period of time or whatever, or just don't want shit coming out of it. With a little work, you can make a front lip like this out of just guarding and edging from your local building supply. Pretty cheap. Light bars and light pods and whatnot with these quick attach Zeus clips. Super quick, super sturdy. You can either do a grommet to get your wire through or run it through the back, or some people have hood scoops. You can just go put your wire through that. Parts that fall off a lot, like headlights, turn signals, bumpers especially, you can write your name and phone number on them, and you might get lucky and a spectator will call you up and get them back to you. Save a lot of money over time. So you can cover all the little holes and stuff in your body and whatnot with these little vinyl circles. I'll show you how to make these in a sec, but these are super handy for keeping dust out of your car and making it so you can positively pressurize your cabin by using a hood scoop, something like that. That's a cheap, trailer or tractor trailer vent. You can get them for 20 bucks on Tractor Supplies or supply websites or military websites. You need to make a bunch of little circles out of tapes of different types quickly. You can just take a little metal tube like this. I sharpened the end with step drill bits, and then I think I used a grinder at the end to make it basically just a sharp circle. And then you can put your tape on a piece of HDPE or plastic or whatever like this, and just put it on them, hit it with a hammer, and boom, you have a bunch of little circles real quick and cheap. Quite large piece of vinyl on the top of my windshield to keep glare down and the sun out of my eyes. And then you can also put different series backers on it for whatever series you're running with. If you're running with more than one series, you can put one on the top and one on the bottom and have two of them and just cover the different ones you're not using that day. Same goes to save money. Instead of having to buy new decal sets for if you're running more than one series, you can just get 2 sets of front doors and use one for each and just unbolt them and swap the doors out every time instead of paying 80 bucks or whatever it is for a new set of stickers. Rear windows, you can either go polycarbonate, Lexan, or you can just take tint or clear tint coatings or coverings and put those on the windows, so if the windows break, you don't have glass all over the place. It kind of keeps it together. As always, to Rain-X and anti-fog coat your windshield before every event. Well, I haven't done it here. A lot of people will put trailer tape or reflective tape on their doors, so if a car is coming up, they've got that reflective lighting. If they're coming up on the side of the road and they can see you better. Same goes for, you can put it on your trunk top. Basically just adds visibility if you're stopped on the side of the stage. Or lenses scratch up really easy. So what you can do is buy some bulk clear lens film and put it over, and it'll make it so you can just peel those off if it gets nasty or scratched up. A lot cheaper than getting new lenses. Do it, but you can save a lot of weight out of a hood by gutting all this internal framing. I'd just suggest leaving enough for wherever you're bolting your light bar to stay secure and not flex around a lot. Another thing is you can fab up a hood strut like this. I'm just using a spare from my extra trunk lid, and it's a lot nicer than having to use the hood bar or whatever it's called. Mine kept falling into the serpentine belt and was grinding off parts, like shaving off parts of this serpentine, and was just like falling off all the time and getting in the way. This also might help if your hood flies up on stage. It might help preventing it from coming into your windshield a little bit, so that's nice as well. Signals and running lights, I was ripping them off every once in a while, and the connectors for them were pretty expensive, so I've just stopped doing that and moved to like these cheap little electrical connectors. They're super cheap, and they pull out instead of ripping apart, so that'll save you some money in the long run maybe. So this jack plate on the subframe, I would suggest reinforcing that if you can. Mine had a tendency to bend up all the time. Same kind of goes for the radiator support where the front of my skid plate mounts on, and a lot of Subarus run like this. These get bent up really quick and easy, so I haven't gotten around to it yet, but that's a good spot to reinforce or replace with tubing. Skid plates, adding some bends down the length, kind of like that, can add a lot of strength to them instead of having it just a flat plate. Another thing you can do is weld more material to the back side of these bolt holes and drill them out so the bolt sits flush, because over time the bolts, when they're sticking out here, will start to get the heads rubbed off of them by the gravel and dirt and whatnot, so that'll protect them. Another thing that's a good idea is under your skid plate, or under your oil pan, it's a good idea to put a piece of foam. That's just like camping mat from Walmart, but this will prevent gravel and rocks from getting caught in between your oil pan and your skid plate. And if something hits it, it'll push that rock through the pan and can like puncture your oil pan. It's an underbody protection. A lot of people use big zip ties to hold this is the rear underbody for my car. It protects the gas tank and rear suspension. A lot of people use the big zip ties to hold them in place. Those things start getting expensive, so I just like bolted some bungee cords, and now they're reusable. It's quicker to get it on and off, and I'm not spending a bunch of money on big old zip ties all the time. Using flange head bolts a lot when I can. They've got basically it's a bolt with a washer built in, so you don't have a separate piece and it distributes the load better. On these cheap eBay poly motor mounts, and I actually like them a lot. One thing that's nice about them is they use bolts that go through instead of a stud that's protruding. It makes, basically once you remove that bolt, you don't have a stud sticking out that gets in the way when you're trying to pull the motor. It makes things much faster. On that note, I like to write torque specs and on a lot of the bolts, so when I've got time to torque them down properly, I know exactly what everything's supposed to be, and I torque strip each bolt when I can, so I know if it's loosening up. I can just quickly look at it and see if it's not lining up with the paint anymore. Here's another example. So these lower control arms on the Subarus are particularly weak. They always bend right up in here whenever you hit anything hard. They're, in my opinion, they're way too weak. So what I do is I take an 1/8 inch thick piece of steel and weld that in here, and then I take little thin caps of steel and weld them in to keep mud from filling it up, keep a little weight down. I also run these anti-lift kits that change your caster and whatnot, so they can make it hard to get basically your control arm out past this trans cross member. So on mine, I just took a little notch out of each one of them, and it'll make pulling control arms and stuff like that much easier. Here, let's see if I can get you better. See how there's a little space there for that now? The issue I see is a lot of people lose their exhaust all the time. So on this, I intentionally tucked it up. You can see it's basically never the lowest point. That one point where it's sticking down over there, actually there's a skid plate for that diff, so it's not really the lowest spot when I've got all my underbody protection on. But it's a good idea to tuck that whole thing up. I also use V-bands for quick disconnect, and all the bolt sizes are the same. In the back, I just did it up like that. You can get this thing off really quickly. You can either in the back use the bolt on this side or just pull it off. I like to color code and mark all my fuel and fluid lines and electrical lines when possible, so someone who doesn't know the car at all can work on it easily and quickly and knows what's going on. Also, it's a good idea to route all of your fuel and electrical lines that are under the car. The same with brake lines if possible. Everything, get it in the car instead of outside where it's going to get knocked out by rocks and stuff like that. Note of relocating fuel and electrical lines inside the car. If you're going to put them inside the car, also make sure they're inside of the cage. You don't want them like right here between the cage and the door where they could get crunched in a crash and start leaking inside the car. Ideally, you really want everything probably running down the trans tunnel. Stuff like this, you can sometimes remove excess bolts. If you've got 4, sometimes you can get away with 2. Another thing I do is simplify the door wiring as much as possible and put it outside the door, so you don't have to dig into the door to disconnect everything. All it is just one connector right here and 2 bolts, and you got the door off and replaced. My wheel well liners on this car aren't the best, but it's never a bad idea to get some protection inside these wheel wells. It'll keep mud from packing up and adding weight to the car, and it'll prevent like wear on the body and stuff, particularly on the Subarus. On this driver's side, a lot of the older ones at least have a wiring harness that's critical running down this frame rail on the outside, but basically underneath that fender. And if you have a flat tire, it can throw up chunks and rip that whole wiring harness and make the car inoperable. So what I do is basically I relocated the wiring harness that came in to the fender well through right here, and I relocated it inside the engine bay and into the passenger compartment that way, protecting it. Well, I haven't gotten around to it on that note. It's handy if you've got time and resources to do it. You can relocate all of your fuse panels and wiring to the co-driver's side, so if you have an issue on stage, you can have them look at it and diagnose it really quickly. Some people also run the light fuses that will blow and have lights on them, or resettable fuses. If you've got the budget, you can also go to more proper motorsport spec wiring setup. So on some cars like this GC Subaru, you'll have certain bolts that go into a frame rail, like this rear subframe bolt, and on the back side of this frame, or on the inside of this frame rail, there's a nut that's tacked in place, and it'll get rusty, and you'll try to remove this bolt, and the tacks will break and the nut will be stuck on the bolt, still just spinning in there, and you can't get it off. Same goes for like these T-brace bolts sometimes. One solution for that is to ahead of time use a hole saw, and you can drill holes kind of like this. This one's not a hole saw, but most of mine are. So you can access those bolts. I also weld them all so it's not just tacks, so that doesn't happen anymore. Basically everything you want to make it take on and off as quickly as possible. For instance, one thing I did with my radiator is move the wiring on this up here so I can do it from up top on the engine bay if I need to change the radiator fan or pull the whole radiator assembly. Quick trick for removing your transmission and certain parts or your engine more quickly. First of all, on a lot of cars like this GC, it's got 8 bolts that hold the transmission to the engine. You don't really need all those. 4 is more than enough. Also on my starter and clutch slave cylinder, instead of using 2 bolts to hold it on, I use 1 bolt and 1 stud. Just make sure you have a spare set of studs for the transmission that's your spare, and that way it's only 1 bolt to remove it. You just use 1 for locating and 1 for holding it down. On top of my cone filter, I always run a pantyhose or something like that. It'll catch any big stuff, and it's basically a pre-filter. You can use 1 or 2 layers of pantyhose, and it's pretty handy. You can always rip it off if you run into trouble or it gets clogged or something. Tail light or turn signal, and you don't have the spare, but they won't let you go back out without a new one. One option is to always just pull one off your trailer and use that. You don't have to have a quick disconnect steering wheel, but I will say it's really nice, especially if you're working on the car and having to get under the dash and stuff. Another thing I do is mark the top where the steering wheel is going to be, so you don't have to spend a bunch of time fiddling with it. You know where it's going to go on. quick disconnect steering wheel. Once again, you really don't have to have one unless you have trouble getting out of the car. Another thing it is handy for, though, in an emergency is you can remove it to get out of the car more easily. So glare can definitely be a problem when you're driving on stage and whatnot. A couple things you can do to reduce that is flock the dash, or this actually came with my car I got from my friend, and this is like basically a Velcro in liner that works pretty well and it's easy to clean. It's kind of handy, even if it's a little ghetto. Another thing you can do is your front A-pillar bars, paint those black. I like relocating the window switches up front. The driver's side one, I try to put really close to the door glass, so if you're trying to climb out a window on a tight trailer where you can't open the door all the way, that it's real close, so if you're trying to get into the window, you can reach the switch to roll it back up when you get out of the car. A couple other nice things I really like are having a GoPro remote, so you don't have to reach back to turn on your GoPro for every stage. Another one that's really nice I like driving with is a shift light. This is just a simple one I got from a friend cheap. Don't have to look down when you're shifting. Relocated the co-driver's window switch to the center, basically, ceiling, so I can reach it if he's not in the car. Convenient to have extra storage up front in your seating area. So one tip I was shown is you can use bicycle storage things, and you can find ones that'll fit in the door bars pretty well. I have two up here, one here, and one back here. I pretty much keep in them, a knife with a window breaker, a little multi-tool, a headlamp, a cigar, and my wallet and cell phone. You can also add more storage in the door. We keep our waters basically in the door. And then on the co-driver's side, he's got an extra storage pocket where you can keep spare amp battery, extra pens, zip ties. On the note of zip ties, on both sides on the door bars, we keep a stack of them just in case you need them to hold parts on the side of the stage or whatever. It's just always handy to have zip ties of various sizes. We've got, the little ones all the way to the pretty big ones. Thing that's nice to have is some grip tape on the floor of both the driver's and the co-driver's area. These probably are due for replacement, but makes getting in and out of the car on slippery days much easier. I use bungees to hold all of our harnesses in place. It just pulls them right out of the way when you unclip, and you're not sitting on them when you get back in the car. It's real handy and it'll save a bunch of time. You can also use surgical tubing. I really like these Drake fire extinguisher mounts. They're kind of pricey, but they're really nice. It's just a single pull and you got it out. You can use band clamps to install different size fire extinguishers. So if you use one, you have to have another one put in at service that you're borrowing from someone. It's not exactly the same diameter. You can put different sizes on. It's also a good idea to write your name on your extinguishers. So yeah, these are really nice, but they're kind of expensive. If you do want to use the regular ones, the cheaper versions, they're fine, but I'd suggest getting the double latch type and taping your little latches over so they don't pop off, because they come off sometimes. On the note of fire extinguishers, it's always good to keep one on each side of the car, so if one side of the car is blocked, you can get the one on the other side of the car. Same for triangles. It's always good to keep at least one on each. Keep a little bit of safety wire or baling wire and race tape handy. You never know when you need the baling wire to fix an exhaust or something like that that's hanging down, and tape can always come in handy. Cross/OK sign taped to the ceiling, so it's accessible from either side. The co-driver has one as well, but this is a nice one to have, so anyone can use it, and it's also taped, so if there's a really bad emergency and you've got your hands full, you can tape the red cross to the back of the car and help the co-driver out or something like that, or the vice versa. It's also reflective, so at night it's much more visible than a traditional one. It's got that reflective tape on it, you might be able to see. I keep my key tied here during races, but if you don't do that, I'd suggest keeping a spare key in the car just in case. If you're trying to keep your car tidy, it's good to zip tie or tape your extra harness webbing. Same can be done. You can use high-vis tape for the pull points on your harness. Just is a little easier to tighten that way. We use two of these flex head flashlights for the co-driver light. We just zip tie them up on the cage like that. They're nice because you can change the angle, it's flexible, and we use two, one to back up in case one goes out, and then I put a little piece of conduit on the end to basically focus the beam so it's not as big and distracting at night. It's nice to keep the tow rope organized with a couple of these little zip ties. What I do is I hold it together with them and then like clip them to weaken them a little bit. So if you ever need this, you can just hook it onto one end and pull it and it'll all break apart. It's just like secured down in the car. On that note, we try to secure all our stuff down on the floor as low as possible towards the back of the car. So we've got all our spare tools and stuff like that, cooler and spill kit and first aid kit all tucked down on the floor behind us to try to move the weight lower and back. I like this setup for the spare tire. Basically it uses an old window net I had with steel cable and a regular ratchet strap handle. Basically you can take the whole thing apart very quickly and you've got everything you need for a tire change with your impact, your jack, and your tire. Give me a second. Basically all you do is unhook this. Boom. You got it off. Then you've got your impact and everything. You can just take all these items together out at once. You've got your socket already on your impact. It's the same size as your lug nuts. I've welded a wheel nut to the jack so raise up and down real quick. And then I don't even have to change the socket. Boom, 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 boom. And you've got your tire changed. If you've got other tips and tricks that I have missed or haven't included, please put them down in the description and like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.